Didn't start asking about Olivia's first husband because he was jealous. He was asking because he had found something her ex, a quiet biotech genius from years ago, had died and left behind a fortune Olivia never knew existed. And Liam, the careful financial analyst, had already begun moving money, changing accounts, and preparing his exit before she could claim a single dollar. But the inheritance came with one condition. Olivia had to appear in person and sign for what was hers. Liam thought he had trapped a pregnant woman with nowhere to go. Instead, he had awakened the rightful heir.
First thing my husband said when I told him I was pregnant was, "That baby's not mine." Then he threw me out. I was sleeping in my car when the truth finally hit me. He wasn't just leaving me, he was replacing me. And he'd been planning it for months. Hi everyone, it's Chloe, welcome back. Please hit subscribe and like this video. Tell me in the comments what city you're from. I love knowing how far these stories go. People say you can feel a marriage dying. They talk about a chill in the room, a silence that's louder than shouting, the way he stops reaching for your hand in the car. But when you read deep in it, you make excuses for the silence. You tell yourself it's just stress from his job. You call it being tired. You say it's just a rough patch. I called it all those things, and it almost destroyed me. But in a strange way, it ended up giving me back a life I thought I'd lost. My name is Chloe Peterson, and I was married to Mark Peterson for 6 years. We lived in a gorgeous brownstone in Boston, South End, the kind of place people photograph. We had perfect friends and threw perfect dinner parties. I'm an architect. Mark is a real estate developer. On paper, we were a power couple. We were the couple people watched at parties, whispering, "They have everything." But paper never tells the whole story. Looking back, the first crack appeared about a year before the end. Mark started having these late-night conference calls in his locked home office. I found him once hunched over his laptop, slamming it shut when I walked in. He just smiled. Said it was a sensitive negotiation for a new property downtown. It was a work thing, he said, then kissed my forehead, and like an idiot, I believed him. When the money got weird, Mark always handled our finances. He was the developer, after all. I trusted him without question. But then he started restructuring our portfolio, rolling all my earnings from my own firm into new joint accounts he controlled, showing me dense spreadsheets that were designed to confuse me. It was for our future, he'd say. Around the same time, he started making strange comments about loyalty. He'd ask hypothetical questions. "What do you think is the worst betrayal?" he'd ask. Ethan Vance was my first husband. We married young. 21. He was 24, and we divorced just 2 years later. It was amicable. Just a sad realization we wanted completely different lives. No kids, no big fight. He moved to San Francisco to chase his tech startup dreams. And we lost touch. I hadn't spoken to Ethan in over a decade. So when I found a receipt for a $30,000 diamond necklace, I felt sick. When I asked him about it, he called me crazy. It was a gift for a client's wife, a business expense. I thought he was just being weird. I thought he was just feeling insecure. I told myself we'd sort it out and tried to forget about it. I was 9 weeks pregnant when my entire life imploded. I'd taken 3 home tests before my doctor finally confirmed it. I was so excited, so nervous. It wasn't exactly planned, but we both knew it was the next step. I really thought Mark and I were ready to build our family. I got home that evening with a little gift box. Inside was a tiny hard hat with Peterson projects on it, and the ultrasound picture. I remember every single second of what came next. Mark opened the box. He saw the hard hat. He glanced at the photo. Then he placed them on the kitchen island, with the slow, deliberate calm of someone executing a plan. He looked right at me, his eyes cold and distant, and said the 5 words that will echo in my head forever. "That is not my child." I laughed. I actually choked out a laugh because it had to be a joke, some horrible twisted joke. But his face was like granite. He said it again. He accused me of having an affair for months. He told me to get out of his house by midnight. When I tried to argue, to grab his arm, he flinched away like I was poison by 10 o'clock. I was in my car in a grocery store parking lot, 3 towns over, the little gift box on the passenger seat, trying to understand how my world had just been leveled. I sat there for hours, the car running, asking myself one question again and again. What kind of man, after 6 happy years, finds out his wife is pregnant and decides, with absolute certainty, that the baby can't be his? I didn't have an answer then, but a cold, dark part of my brain was already starting to connect the dots. I stayed in my car all night. It's not like the movies, where you cry yourself to sleep. I just sat in the driver's seat, heater blasting, because it was a brutal Boston February, and that kind of cold gets in your bones. I was too shocked to feel anything but numb. I just sat there. The store was still open. I watched families pushing carts, their kids half asleep. Just a normal weeknight happening a few feet away, but it felt like another universe. Around 1 in the morning, I did the math. I had maybe $300 in my wallet. Everything else I'd ever earned was in those restructured accounts Mark controlled. My work computer was in that house. My blueprints, my client contracts. My entire life's work was on a hard drive on my desk. My health insurance was through Mark S. company. I was 9 weeks pregnant, with no insurance, no access to my savings, and no key to my own home. And then I realised I was sitting on the one clue. Mark was betting it never pieced together. The thought arrived quietly, with terrifying clarity. The necklace, it wasn't for a client. Mark wasn't a jealous man, he was a developer. He didn't operate on emotion, he operated on leverage. He built his career on knowing the value of assets and when to cut a loss. So the accusation wasn't about me at all. It was a cover story. He was projecting his own guilt onto me. The only reason to accuse your pregnant wife of cheating is if you're the one with a secret. I pulled out my phone and searched his company's social media feed. I scrolled back for months, looking for a clue. Then I saw it. A post from a charity 2 months ago. There was Mark, smiling for the camera. And next to him was a woman I didn't know, her hand on his arm. And around her neck was the $30,000 diamond necklace. I stared at the phone in the dark. Did Liam know that I didn't? And how long had he known it? I didn't sleep at all around 5 a.m. I drove to a 24-hour diner on Lincoln Avenue and ordered coffee and toast I couldn't eat. I sat in a booth and thought. By the time the morning regulars started shuffling in, I had the bones of a plan. First, I had to get back into that house and get my things. My passport, social security card, my iMac, and the backup drive with my life's work. They belonged to me. Liam couldn't legally keep them from me, but I knew he would try to. Second, I needed legal help before I did another thing. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet. I needed someone to tell me my rights regarding our finances, and if Liam could legally change the locks on a townhouse that was in both our names. I suspected he couldn't. I needed to be certain. Third, I had to see a doctor. I was 9 weeks pregnant and without insurance. I needed answers fast. And fourth, the part that felt both terrifying and critical. I had to find out what Liam knew about Ethan Caldwell. Because if Liam had been digging into my ex-husband's finances, then his accusation wasn't a moment of anger, it was a strategy. Why would a man make up a reason to throw his pregnant wife out on the street? The answer was ugly, but it made perfect sense. Because he wanted his wife gone before an event occurred that would give her a claim to something he wanted for himself. I wrapped my hands around the cold coffee mug. I wasn't a stupid woman. I had built a career on seeing the underlying grid in a chaotic design, and I could see the grid here too. Mark saw a storm coming, something connected to this woman, and he tried to throw me overboard before the waves hit. The baby just forced his hand. That had to be it. But he made a huge error. He did it too fast, too brutally. A man with a solid plan doesn't just invent a lie and change the locks. He panicked, and panic leaves a messy trail. I dropped a 5 on the table, put on my coat, and walked into the biting Boston wind, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel focused. Not okay, not even remotely safe, but focused. Like an architect when they finally see the finished building in their mind. I finally knew the layout, knew which walls were real and which ones were just an illusion. I got in my car, scrolled through my contacts, and found Sarah Chen's name. A shark of a divorce lawyer I knew from a women's leadership group. I had her personal number because she'd once considered hiring my firm for her office redesign. It was just after 7 a.m. I sent the text anyway. Sarah, it's Chloe Peterson. I need to see you today if possible. Urgent family matter. I'm sorry for the early message. Her reply came back in less than 10 minutes. I'll move my 9 a.m. meeting. Be here at 8:30. I exhaled slowly. The plan was just an outline, but a blank page is where every great building begins. Grace Adler's firm was downtown, on the 35th floor of a glass towered, passed 1,000,000 times but never stepped inside. Her assistant met me in the lobby at Knight and Tanam and took me to a conference room overlooking the harbour. It smelled like fresh espresso and absolute control. My clothes were from the day before. I hadn't slept. I'd stopped at a Sieves for a toothbrush and a plain grey shirt, the only thing I could manage. Grace walked in at 9:15 sharp, set a clean legal pad on the polished table, and looked right at me with the kind of calm eyes that have seen everything. "Tell me what happened," she said, "from the very beginning. Don't leave a single thing out." So I did. Took notes on her pad, not saying a word. Until I finished, 20 minutes later, I finally ran out of steam, and she capped her pen. "All right, let's tackle the immediate fires," she said. "The apartment is in both your names, right?" It was. "Then he can't legally lock you out. Changing the key code is an illegal eviction. Well, file for emergency access. Next, your joint accounts. Has he moved any money since last night?" I had no clue. "Check," she said, pushing her own phone across the table. I logged into my banking app. The balance read $206. Last week it was over 60,000. I slid the phone back to her. Hand was rock steady, which felt bizarre. "He cleared it out last night," I said. Grace's expression didn't change, but her pen started moving again. "Find the transfer records." I did. 2 large transfers, both between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, just an hour after he told me to get out. They went to some account number ID never seen. "That's dissipation of marital assets," Grace said, still writing. "It gives us everything we need to petition for an immediate freeze on all his finances." "How long were you married?" 7 years. "And you've lived in Massachusetts this whole time?" "Yes." "Good. This is an equitable distribution state. He can't just take the money and run." Looked up from her notes. Okay, now tell me about your first husband. I told her about Leo, what little I knew recently, and the puzzle pieces I was trying to fit together. She listened, completely focused. So you think your current husband learned something about your ex-husband's financial state and made a move to cut you off before something an inheritance, a settlement could materialize. She made it sound so simple, so obvious. I think it's a possibility, I said. It's more than a possibility, she said. It's a textbook motive, if we can prove it. This isn't just a messy divorce anymore. She leaned back. When you leave here, call the Boston Bar Association. Get a referral for an estate lawyer specializing in inheritance disputes. You need to find out if Leo Harrison left any legal document with your name on it. A will, a trust, you name it. You can't just go asking for it, but a good estate attorney knows how to find out. I nodded, scribbling notes myself. And Olivia, document everything, every single text, every phone call. Download every bank statement you can still access. Screenshot it all and email it to an account Ethan knows nothing about. Do you have an old email he can't get into? I did. A personal one from before we were married that he never even knew existed. Use that one for everything, she instructed. Starting now. I left Grace's office an hour later with a file folder, a very clear plan, and a strange sense of calm. Purpose. The Boston morning was sharp and bright, the kind of winter sun that makes you feel like you can handle anything. I sat in my car in the parking garage and got to work. I forwarded the bank screenshots to my secret email address. I took photos of the transfer confirmations. I wrote a message to our bank's fraud division, reporting the massive withdrawals and asking for a freeze, using the exact legal words Gress had given me. Then I needed to find Leo's family. We hadn't talked in years, but I remembered his sister Julia. She'd always been kind to me. Found her on LinkedIn, same name, same warm smile, just a little older. I messaged her, explaining I was Olivia, Leo's ex-wife, and that I had a very urgent reason to ask about his estate. I said. I was sorry for how strange this must be, I told her. I hoped she was okay. She called me less than an hour later. Her voice was tight. Olivia Leo passed away in November. It was an aneurysm. He was only 50. She stopped. His attorneys, they've been trying to find you for months. How could you not know? I told her. My life had sort of exploded recently. She was silent for a second. He never remarried, she said, her voice softer now. He still talked about you, you know, right up to the end. Said you were the only person who ever really got him. Another quiet moment. His estate lawyer is Robert Miller. He's based in San Francisco. Olivia, you need to call him. I just sat in that grey parking garage long after we hung up. Leo was gone. He'd been gone for months, and his lawyers were searching for me. And just like that, everything clicked into place. Ethan's weird questions about Leo, the sudden, vicious fight, the money vanishing from our account, the second I was out the door. Ethan didn't just suspect something was up. Ethan knew. He'd found out about Leo's death months ago. Maybe from a tech blog, an old colleague, or a simple Google search. Spent all that time waiting, plotting his move, and the moment I told him I was pregnant, making his clean getaway messy, he set his plan in motion. That was the real gut punch. Not the things, he yelled, not the shock of being thrown out. It was this, right here. Realizing my husband had been methodically planning to ruin me for money I didn't even know was coming. I looked up Robert Miller's firm in San Francisco and dialed. His paralegal put me on hold for 5 minutes. When he finally came on the line, his voice was professional, wary. but also deeply relieved. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, "I am so glad you called. We have a matter of significant urgency regarding the estate of Leo Harrison. You are the primary beneficiary." "Significant?" I asked, my voice completely empty. $62 million, he replied, "but there is a specific stipulation attached, 62 million. I just stared at the stenciled letters on the concrete pillar in front of me. Level P3. The universe was giving me something mundane to anchor to, while my reality shattered and reformed around me. Robert Miller explained the condition. Leo had put his assets into a trust stock from his company sale, real estate, investment accounts. The condition for me to inherit was incredibly simple. I had to appear in person at their San Francisco office within 90 days of being notified to sign the documents and prove I was who I said I was. Robert explained that Leo was always a private, careful guy. He put that clause in the trust for exactly this reason, to stop the kind of fraudulent claims that always pop up with big estates. He wanted me, the actual Olivia, to physically be there, betting that a fake wouldn't go through all that trouble. He updated the trust about a year before he passed, Robert said. You were always part of it, but this final version significantly increased your inheritance after his software company was bought out. Was the trust's existence a matter of public record? I asked. There was a small pause. The existence of a trust can sometimes be discovered through certain property or business filings. Specific details weren't public, but someone with resources and a strong motive could have found out it existed. Mr. Miller paused again. Is there a particular reason you're asking? Yes, I said. There is. I told him everything about Ethan, the timing of it all, about the money he drained from our joint account the night he kicked me out. Mr. Miller was silent the whole time. When I was done, he said, Mrs. Sterling, you need to have your lawyer make absolutely sure that any inheritance is designated as separate property, and put into an account your husband has zero legal access to. Since you are still legally married, this part is absolutely critical. No, I said. I was with my lawyer this morning. Good, he replied. Get to Boston as soon as you can. I flew to Boston 3 days later. My lawyer, Grace, had already convinced a judge to freeze our joint account. She also sent a formal notice to Ethan's lawyer, establishing my right to enter our home and get my personal belongings. A police escort met me there when I went back. Ethan was home. He just leaned against the living room doorframe, watching me pack my life into boxes, with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not guilt, but the cold, detached look of someone calculating risks. He didn't speak to me once. His mother, Helen, was there too, sitting on the couch with her hands clasped, her eyes following my every move. Sterling was 73 years old, thin, with silver hair cut in a severe, perfect bob. She had the warm, smiling demeanour of someone who uses kindness as a weapon. She had never approved of me. I knew that from our very first holiday dinner, but she was never obvious about it. It was always in the little things. The way she'd ask about my architectural projects, with just a hint of surprise in her tone, as if a woman couldn't possibly understand blueprints. The way she would always support Ethan's side of any story we told. She was, I'd always suspected, the real driving force behind his ambition. He wasn't stupid, but he was a man who needed a woman to tell him what to want, and Helen had been doing that for his entire life. As I walked out with my final box, she spoke for the very first time. You're making a colossal mistake, Claire, she said. her voice sweet as poison. I grabbed the last box and walked out without a word. I signed the final papers in San Francisco that Tuesday. Mr. Davies' law firm occupied the top floor of a tower overlooking the bay, with floor-to-ceiling windows. His assistant offered me sparkling water with the kind of practiced, gentle sympathy reserved for people handling enormous sums of money. The whole process took almost 5 hours identity verification, endless document signing, and legal confirmations. Mr. Davies walked me through every single page. The money would arrive in phases, with an initial transfer of nearly $7 million in a month, and the rest paid out as my Uncle S' remaining assets were sold off. I flew back to Charlotte on Wednesday evening. Thursday morning, my phone rang with an unknown number. I picked up a man's voice, calm and a little too friendly, said Claire. "I'm a friend, Limbs. This is just a courtesy call. Women who do what you're doing often find their lives get complicated, personally, professionally. You're an architect. A professional license is a fragile thing, you know. It can always be reviewed." He paused for effect. "You should really think hard about whether this is the hill you want your career to die on." I stood there in my friend's kitchen, where I'd been staying. My old colleague Sarah had given me her guest room, and I just held the phone, thinking about how scared I was supposed to be. "I'm recording this conversation," I said calmly. "What's your name?" The line immediately went dead. I called my lawyer, Ms. Chin. She confirmed exactly what I suspected. A threat against my professional license from an anonymous caller, but obviously ordered by my husband during a legal dispute, was a huge mistake on his part. It came to my personal cell phone. The call data was already logged. Mrs. Chen filed a harassment motion that same afternoon. Liam's lawyer called her the next morning, asking to find a more amicable solution. Ms. Chen called me right after, and I could practically hear her smile. "Never thought you'd have a top-tier lawyer ready to go," she said. "They figured you'd be panicked and alone." "I know," I replied. "They'll just try something else now," she told me. "Just rest for a couple days. Eat, sleep. You need to be strong for what comes next." And so I did. I spent the next 3 days doing almost nothing. I took long walks around Freedom Park, bought sandwiches from a small deli near Sarah's place, and read a thick book I'd been putting off for years. I let my body focus on the quiet work of growing the new life inside me. My first appointment with a new doctor, set up with my own insurance that Mrs. Chen helped arrange, was on a Friday. Strong, steady heartbeat. Everything was exactly where it should be. Afterward, I just sat in my car in the clinic parking lot and felt, for the first time in weeks, a sense of genuine peace. It didn't last, but it was real. Their next move came the following Tuesday, about a week after the harassment motion was filed. Liam S. attorney, some guy named Richard Vance I.D. never met, sent a formal letter proposing mediation. Attached to it, and I knew this was no accident, was a financial settlement. Liam would agree to an uncontested divorce. He'd give up any claim on our frozen accounts, and would, the letter said generously, not challenge my claim to the San Francisco inheritance. In return, I would have to drop harassment motion, take a much smaller share of our marital property, and sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. I read the entire thing twice. Then I called Ms. Chin. "He's buying your silence," she said instantly. "That is a dead giveaway. He's not worried about the money. He's worried about what you know and what you might tell people. About him secretly tracking your uncle's company sale before he kicked me out," I said. "Exactly. That's a pattern of behaviour that would absolutely destroy him, personally and professionally, if it ever became public record. In private equity, reputation is everything. She paused. And frankly, this offer is a financial insult. Your legal share of the marital assets, considering the length of our marriage and the fact he drained your joint account, is far more than what Hes offering. So we say no, I said. We say no, she confirmed. And we don't make a counteroffer that sends the message that you aren't looking for a quick payout. You're looking for justice, and that says exactly what we did. I won't lie, part of me was tempted. There's a version of you pregnant, exhausted, living in a friend's guest room, terrified of the future, who sees a number like that and thinks, maybe this is enough. Maybe I just sign it and disappear. I let myself feel that for about an hour. One afternoon on Sarah's sofa, drinking herbal tea while the Charlotte rain tapped on the glass. Then I pushed that feeling away, because that offer wasn't about helping me start over. It was about protecting Liam. And I suspected it was really about protecting Eleanor, his mother. Because someone had spent months researching the sale of my uncle's company, and Liam, for all his slick moves, wasn't the type for quiet, patient investigation. He played the markets, he cut deals. But digging into the financial history of his wife's family without her noticing, that took someone Liam trusted completely. Someone with time, with motive, and with nothing to lose. Mother had been the one sitting at the table when I came for my things, just watching me with those quiet, calculating eyes. I called my Aunt Isabel, my Uncle Arthur's sister, and asked her a very specific question. Had anyone called her, or anyone else in our family, after my uncle died, asking about his company or about me? Isabel was silent for a long moment. A woman did call, she said finally, maybe a month after the funeral. Claimed she was a reporter doing a story on early tech founders. She asked if Arthur had left any big bequests. I didn't think anything of it, I told her. I wasn't sure. Then she paused and she had a Charlotte area code. That was all I needed to hear. Sarah has been my rock since we met in grad school. We bonded instantly in an urban planning class over our shared hatred of bad coffee and love of old buildings. She's practical, hilarious, and fiercely loyal in a way that shows up in actions, not words. She handed me a spare key to her apartment 12 hours after my first panicked phone call. No judgment, she just said. Stay as long as you need to. That night, she came home from work to find me buried in a mountain of paperwork at her kitchen table. She started making pasta. She poured a glass of wine for herself and a glass of water for me. She sat down and said, "Okay, tell me everything," and I did. The inheritance, the settlement offer, the threatening call, and what my Aunt Isabel had just told me. Sarah listened to the whole story, her gaze fixed on my face, never interrupting. When I finally finished, she took a thoughtful bite of pasta, so his mother knew about the inheritance before Lum even kicked you out. I nodded, sure of it. The whole idea was to get rid of you before the deal closed, so he could claim it all. But you were named directly in the sale agreement, so their entire plan was pointless from the start. I know, I said. I think they completely misjudged the situation. They must have thought my uncle left me some small token amount. Not that I was a primary beneficiary. I don't think they knew how much money was involved, so they panicked, Sarah said. I think so. Then I got pregnant, I added, which really messed up their schedule, and Liam made a move that was fast but incredibly stupid. Sarah took another bite of pasta. So what else next? What do you need from me? I might need a witness, I told her, someone who can testify about what I was like when I first showed up here. The exact timing of everything is going to be vital for my case. Done, she said, without a second of hesitation. I just looked at her across the table. Outside, the downpour had softened to a drizzle. Charlotte has this warm, hazy glow at night, a light that seems kind to people who are worn down to the bone. I'd been running on pure adrenaline for weeks, and I noticed that kindness even from the city lights. Thank you, I said. Just waved her hand. Don't thank me yet. Somewhere in a huge modern house on the other side of town, Liam and his mother Eleanor were watching my every move. I could feel it. And I knew their next step wouldn't be another polite letter from a lawyer. I was right. They made their move on a Sunday, but not as a team. Eleanor came first by herself, which I immediately recognised as a strategic play. She called Sarah's cell. A number I know I never gave her, so Liam must have found it. She called around 10 in the morning, asking if she could please stop by for a chat. She used the word please, a word I had never heard her use before. I thought for a second, and then I said yes. Saying no accomplished nothing. But saying yes, well, that might get me some answers. She arrived at 11 o'clock, holding a small box of homemade scones. The gesture was so perfectly staged to make her seem like a harmless old woman. It was almost laughable. She sat on Sarah's couch, declined my offer of tea, and subtly scanned the apartment with the look of someone judging every single item. I just want to apologise, she began, on Liam's behalf, for how all of this happened. I sat across from her, silent. He panicked, she continued. He's been under so much stress at his firm. And then when you told him about the baby, he didn't handle it well. He knows that. He is absolutely devastated. She folded her hands neatly in her lap. This is a terrible mistake. You and Ethan have history. 6 years, with a child on the way. The words hung in the air. A child deserves a father, a complete family. You need to think about what this legal fight will do to your baby. And that was the real point, wasn't it? The quiet little threat. And my grandfather's money, I added. Just a tiny hesitation, but I saw it. That's a private matter, she replied, her voice cold. It's not related to your marriage. Catherine, I said, who contacted Marcus Thorner's wealth manager, pretending to be me. Her composure finally cracked. It was there, and gone in a flash, instantly controlled. I don't know what you mean. Oh, I think you do. She composed herself, the warm facade slipping perfectly back into place. Amelia, as the grandmother of this baby, in begging you to consider what you're throwing away. Ethan wants a fresh start. He's agreed to therapy. He wants to rebuild the trust. And all he needs is for me to drop this whole thing. It's damaging his reputation, his business. He wants me to drop the lawsuit, I stated flatly, and sign a non-disclosure agreement. He wants his family back, she insisted. I just looked at her, 71, with flawless grey hair and a plate of homemade scones on the table. This woman had spent her life understanding that kindness was a strategy, and patience was a weapon. The easiest way to win is to make everyone else look unreasonable. Catherine, I said, I know about the offshore accounts. I know you looked into my grandfather's entire portfolio, and I know you called his wealth manager. My attorney knows too. A judge has already ruled that Ethan was actively hiding marital assets. I got to my feet. Tell Ethan the answer is no. Tell him it was never going to be yes. And if anyone from your family contacts my friends or my doctor again, we're filing a harassment claim by Friday. Catherine's warmth didn't just fade. It was gone. No, it switched off, like a screen going black. The face beneath was glacial, hard, emotionless, and calculating. "You are making a very powerful enemy," she said. "I've already got one," I replied. "I just like knowing who I'm really up against." She stood, collected her scones, and went to the door. Right before leaving, she turned. "This is not a threat, it's a guarantee," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "You have no idea what you've started." And she was gone. Standing there in my friend of his apartment, I realized my hands were trembling. It wasn't just being scared. It's the price your body pays for keeping up a brave face. It's that moment your body finally shows the stress your mind was hiding. I was terrified. It would be a lie to say otherwise. Catherine Hayes didn't bluff. She had the money, the network, and a lifetime of practice in emotional manipulation. She raised Ethan, after all. She knows how to find your breaking point and push. But something else was happening. The fear wasn't making me want to hide. It was stealing my resolve to see this through. It reminded me of something my father, an architect, always said. "Amelia, buildings don't collapse because of the storm. They collapse because they weren't built to withstand it in the first place." Talking about buildings, but now I knew exactly what he meant. I was designed to carry far more weight than Ethan or his mother ever imagined. I called my lawyer, Mrs. Davies, and told her about Catherine's visit. I recorded their entire conversation on my phone. Georgia is a one-party consent state. Ms. Davies heard the audio and simply said, "Excellent." My next call was to my financial advisor. He confirmed the initial transfer from my grandfather's trust had gone through. I opened the journal where I logged everything and wrote a new header. "They're scared, use their fear," and I drew a line under it twice. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. 3 weeks earlier, Mrs. Davies filed for discovery, requesting bank records, emails, messages, everything for the last 2 years. Ethan's attorney objected to almost everything, and the judge overruled nearly all of them. The paper trail told the whole story. Not that I was surprised. Ethan first searched my grandfather's name, Marcus Thorne, last April. The search history was on his cloud drive, which his lawyers fought to keep private and lost. He'd researched the sale of Marcus Company, his business profile, and a Boston law firm that specialized in exactly the kind of family trust my grandfather had set up. Catherine's phone logs, which took my lawyer 2 weeks to get, showed a call to my grandfather's wealth manager in November. That was the call he'd warned me about. The logs also showed 11 phone calls between Catherine and Ethan in the 3 days before he threw me out. And then we found the text from Ethan to his mother. He said he needed the Amelia situation resolved before the lawyers from Boston could contact her. He sent that text the Thursday before our fight. He knew everything for days. He planned the entire ambush. We were in Ms. Davies' conference room for the deposition, the very same room where she told me to check our accounts 4 months ago. So much was different now. Ethan sat across from me for the first time since that awful night. He wore a grey suit and had the rigid, over-prepared look of someone who'd been prepped by his lawyers for hours. The first half hour was routine. Ethan gave his canned responses, saying, "I don't recall so many times it sounded like a nervous habit." Then Ms. Davies brought up the text message, projected it onto the huge screen in the room, and just let it sit there. A perfect power move. Ethan glanced at it. I saw his shoulders tense, just a fraction, but I knew his tells after 6 years. "Mr. Hayes, Do you recognize this message? It looks like it's from my phone. Did you send it? I might have. It says you needed the Amelia situation resolved. What did you mean by that? His lawyer objected. Mrs. Davies moved on. Mr. Hayes, before October 14th, did you know your wife was the heir to Marcus Thorne's estate? The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Is that a yes or a no, Mr. Hayes? Ethan's attorney, a man his father played golf with, touched his arm. Ethan was silent. My client is declining to answer, the lawyer started. Miss Davies cut him right off. On what grounds? He testified. He had no other sources of income. She was sharp, precise. Refusal to answer is on the record. Ethan looked at his lawyer, a panicked, silent exchange passing between them, and I saw the exact moment. Ethan realized his entire story had just collapsed. It wasn't a crash, it was a surrender. Like a foundation shifting when a key support is removed. A crack, then a shudder. He finally met my eyes, looking for something. I used to wonder how I'd feel right now. Triumphant, devastated. Some sick mix of the two. Instead, I felt calm. The calm of an architect who knows her own design is sound, who knows exactly which walls are built to last. I held his gaze without flinching. He broke eye contact first in the elevator. Mrs. Davies said he's going to settle quickly. I know, I replied. The doors opened to a bright May afternoon. The kind of light that made Charleston feel like summer was already here. Mrs. Davies looked at me. How are you doing, Amelia? I had to think about it. My ankles were swollen. I was bonnet-tired. I missed having a home. But for the first time in a very long time, a strange new feeling washed over me. The fear was gone.
Okay, I said. Really, actually, okay. Ethan settled 8 days later. He had no choice. The agreement was 30 pages.
He gave up all claim to my inheritance, acknowledged it was mine alone, and paid back the $150,000 he had moved. I got our new house and most of our investments. That non-disclosure agreement he wanted. It was torn up. I signed nothing that would keep me quiet. A prenatal paternity test at 12 weeks had already proven. Ethan was the father. That bitter truth was now part of the public record. Hard proof that his claims were a complete fabrication. I hope he saw that part. The first payment from the settlement hit my account on a Wednesday. I was at my friend's house when the notification popped up. I just stared at the amount frozen. I texted her, "It's over." Her reply came back instantly. Just 3 party popper emojis and my name, Amelia. I called my grandfather's old partner and said, "We won." Silent for a moment. "Your grandfather would be so proud," he told me. He truly would. Ethan signed the final divorce decree on a Tuesday. He never once looked at me. Our marriage was finally done. Driving home, stuck in traffic on the bridge, my daughter kicked for the very first time. A small, certain little nudge, like a secret message. "I'm here," it seemed to say, in a way only a mother can hear. I know I thought back to her, me too. Her name is Nora. She was born on a Friday in August, 6 pounds and 9 ounces, with her father's dark, thoughtful eyes, and as everyone tells me, my determined jaw. Of a small craftsman house now, just south of Denver. It gets so much more light than our old place, and has a workshop in the back where I'm building my new business. My own furniture design company has 5 commissions lined up. My maker's mark is burned into the wood. That means more to me than I can say. My grandfather's inheritance gave me the runway to start over. I won't lie about that, but I fought to stay grounded. I still check every joint twice. I still call my sister every Saturday. Marcus' hedge fund took a massive hit a month after we split. He had to liquidate a huge part of his portfolio. He sees our daughter, June, every other weekend, and we keep it civil. Hez her dad. No matter what he did, that fact stands. On the days the anger still burns, I try to keep those two things separate and usually fail. I haven't said a word to his sister Olivia since learning she knew about her best friend Sophia the whole time. That door is closed for good. My best friend Lena got married last spring. I was her maid of honor, with June strapped to my chest, screaming her little lungs out during their entire ceremony. Lena says she'll never let me forget it. My grandpa's old mentor, Mr. Rossi, stopped by. He brought a box of my grandfather's old design sketches, I'd never seen before. He always said you had the truest grain of anyone he knew, Mr. Rossi told me, his voice thick with memory. I just traced the faint pencil lines of an old chair design for the longest time. I know, I whispered. I'm trying to be some afternoons. I sit on my porch and think about how I got here. A Thursday night in May, an email notification from our joint account, a single gut-wrenching payment to a luxury design firm for a condo I knew nothing about. It didn't feel like a story then. It felt like being inside a house during an earthquake, grabbing for anything solid as the walls came down, but the foundation held. When June gets older, I'm going to tell her all of this. Not as a sad story, but as a blueprint. See, I'll tell her. This is what's built to last. If I learned one thing from this whole disaster, it's this. The people who want to keep you small are making a bet. They're betting you. Don't realize how strong you actually are. Marcus was betting it'd be too scared to leave. His sister was betting it'd be too ashamed to speak up. They both lost that bet. Know your own design. Write everything down. Find your Lena. And never, ever let someone else own your voice. What would you have done if that notification popped up on your phone? Tell me your story in the comments. I truly want to know. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please pass it on. Thank you for being here.